Devereux impartiality interest. Item 12.6, Councillor Wilfred Hendricks impartiality interest. Item 13.2, Councillor Bronwyn Ife financial interest. Item 13.2, Councillor Peter Devereux impartiality interest. And item 13.5, Councillor Bronwyn Ife impartiality interest.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Okay, so our public participation time. I have a list of questions. Our first question from our public is from Graham Ferstat. What are the following amounts in the financial accounts for? The first one is on the 16th of December 2021, Mick Haynes, signed painter, 1,100. And on the 22nd of January 2022, Mick Haynes, signed painter, 1,100. And on the 6th of January 22, Boston Brewing Co. for $990. I would now ask Luke Ellis, our Acting Chief Financial Officer, please, to respond.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I'll work through them in order. The first payment to Mick Haynes relates to chalk wall painting for Christmas. The second to the same person was for chalk wall painting in relation to AFL finals. And the third payment to Boston Brewery was for offsite training and review session held in November for the operations team.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Okay, the next set of questions. I have 10 questions, and they are from Mr. Vince Maxwell. And I will go through them one by one and ask for a response before I move to the next question. So the first one, with reference to the attachment 14.3.1, the annual budget review of 2021 to 2022, final, page 8, employment expenses, salaries and increase, the rate 17,000. So please provide an explanation of what this amount is for. I'll now ask Mr. Luke Ellis, our Acting Financial Officer, please.
Thank you again. The $17,000 increase relates to salaries year to date, and that's in relation to additional hours and overtime required for the underground power projects currently being conducted in the town.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Our next question is from page 8, note 2, professional services expenses. Increase predominantly relates to additional parking contract services of $196,100. Please provide an explanation of what work this additional parking contract services relates to. Mr. Ellis?
Thank you. The increase in parking contract services is largely offset by a reduction in parking general consultancy, as that better reflected the nature of the expenditure, and will be addressed through next year's annual budget.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. The next question from Mr. Maxwell is on page 8, and it's note 4. It's program expenses. An increase in expenses due to security services Aqualife of $50,000, Leisure Life of $50,000, the library of $30,000, and customer services of $20,000. The total of these 4 items is $150,000. Please explain what these additional security services were used for. Mr. Ellis? I'd like to call on Luke Ellis, our Acting Chief Financial Officer.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. The budget amendments all relate to the same type of expenditure, and that is for concierge services supplied by a third-party security firm working in those town buildings related to COVID-19 vaccine mandate checking.
Thank you. And our next question is on page 9, note 15, non-operating revenue, transfer from reserve reduction in transfer from reserve of $121,028. This is described as a savings from budget to pay out RRFA exit fees. What is the total cost of the exit fee? Acting Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Luke Ellis.
Thank you. I may direct this question for an explanation from our Finance Manager, Mr. Billingham.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The RAFA exit fee came in under budget at $7.083 million. We budgeted $7.21 million. The saving is the difference between the original budget and the year-to-date actual received. Hence, the reserve fund will have a saving and the operating expenditure will have a saving. So there's a nil effect on the rate setting statement. It's all covered by the two. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Billingham. Okay, the next question is on page 54, it's operations waste services, capital expenses, furniture and equipment of $417,000. The 3-bin system was known about before the annual budget was set. Why wasn't this amount for additional bins already in the budget? Acting Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Luke Ellis.
Thank you. I may also direct this to Mr. Billingham.
Thank you, Mr. Billingham.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The 3-bin system was programmed for delivery in August 2022. That is into next financial year. And again, the current 21-22 budget has no provision for purchasing of bins this year, as the rollout is not to occur in this financial year. The reason this item is bringing it forward in the budget review is we have experienced service or supply chain issues with purchase of goods and services due to COVID. So I believe Mr. Wong has requested in the budget to bring forward part of that money for the bins this year, so we can get them ordered now in time for them to be rolled out in August next financial year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Billingham. Actually, there's another question here in relation to the topic. Why isn't there a separate line item for the bins instead of including this significant cost into furniture and equipment? Would I be directing that to Mr. Billingham or our Acting Chief Financial Officer, Luke Ellis?
Mr. Billingham, please.
Yeah, Mr. Billingham, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The line item is for capital expenditure. We're buying the bins in bulk, so we're going to capitalise them against furniture and equipment. That's the best balance sheet category to put them into. We don't have line items in the balance sheet just called bins, hence we are putting it to there. And again, that is just standard accounting practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. The next question is in relation to the capital expense items payment sweeper of $280,000. The question is, how many sweepers does the town own and how many machine hours per year is recorded for each sweeper? I'd now ask Natalie Adams, our Chief Operations Officer, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So the answer to the first question is the town has 3 sweepers, and each sweeper, for the second question, does a minimum of 800 hours per year.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Okay. On page 59, the capital expense items, the library self-service system of $45,840. Is this in addition to or a replacement of the existing RFID that was purchased a few years ago? I'd now ask Natalie Martin-Wood, our Chief Community Planner, to respond.
Through the Chair, that project was carried forward from a previous budget and was installed in the 21-22 financial year. So that's a new item, not a replacement or an addition.
And just a follow-on question from this, will this self-service system translate into a reduction in staff costs? Ms. Natalie Martin-Good.
Through the Chair, not necessarily. So manual handling and sorting activities, so you can imagine the returning and sorting of books still needs to be done by staff. We're hoping that there will be some efficiencies in that. And also you can, there'll be, you can imagine staff tasks that have previously been undertaken through not having the RFID, so scanning the books out. That will be, that staffing will now be redirected to other processes. So you mentioned the library is not just about books, it's about events, it's about training. And so those staff hours will be directed to those type of staff activities.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Okay, that will be the end of our questions. Moving on to statement time. Our first statement is from Mr. Mike Gould from East Victoria Park, and it reads as follows. Although traffic calming measures were last undertaken in 2017, as a local resident of over 10 years, these have limited success in encouraging drivers to limit their speed to 40 kilometres per hour. Also in the last 2 years, 3 venues, Pizza, Kebabs and Sheesh, have commenced trading until 3 a.m. This has dramatically changed the traffic dynamics of the area, with an increase in pedestrian motor vehicle, for example, Uber food and pickups, and delivery vehicles. Also, late night hoon and antisocial behaviour is prevalent. Daytime activities now include 3 very popular cafe outlets, attracting mothers with prams, dog walkers and elderly residents without a safe road crossing system. A painted medium strip is ancient technology and is frequently ignored by motorists. This area will only become busier with a planned childcare centre and the future development of Edward Miller Park. I implore you not to become blindsided by past actions. Painted 40 km/h signs on the road surface are ineffective. This is a dynamic section of Albany Highway and demands and requires smart solutions which could be achieved with low cost and disruption. Okay, and our second statement is from Neil Teo from Dynamic Planning and Developments, and that's in relation to 12.2. It reads as follows. We, Dynamic Planning and Development, Pty Ltd, act as the applicant for item 12.2 on the Council's agenda briefing forum, which relates to a development application at lots 99 to 101, number 84 to 88 Goodwood Parade, Burswood, herein referred to as the subject site. We are providing this written letter to the town's elected members in lieu of us providing a verbal deputation relating to item 12.2 by way of efficiently and ease in this virtual and COVID-19 affected landscape. The nature of this letter is to note our full support for the proposed development application and the officer's positive recommendation for an extension to the existing temporary approval of the tavern and brewery land uses at the site until the 1st of July 2033. Whilst we acknowledge there will be no determination made at the 1st of March agenda briefing forum, we kindly request that councillors support the officer's recommendation at the ordinary council meeting scheduled for the 15th of March 2022. We consider the proposed extension of time for the approved use will allow the immediate locality to significantly benefit from the extended social and community activation that currently occurs at the site as a successful transitional use. Currently, the town's intended vision for the site, being large-scale residential office development, has yet to transpire, and there is no significant evidence or interest from developers to suggest this will happen in the near future. The existing approval, tavern and brewery uses assist in revitalising an ageing industrial neighbourhood to a vibrant and eclectic urban village to facilitate activity, connections and public life into our future mixed-use neighbourhood. Okay, that brings us to the end of our statements. We have no presentations this evening and we have no deputations. Okay, so moving on to item 10, method of dealing with agenda business. So questions have been raised by elected members on the following items. 12.3, Metronet management and maintenance of public spaces draft position statement. 12.4, draft local planning strategy, consultation outcomes and recommendation modifications. 12.5, Higgins Park Tennis Club application. 12.3, delegation for the CEO for the 3-bin Garden Organic System Procurement Award. We also have a question from 12.1, the Burswood South Streetscape Improvement Concept Plan in the final stage, and 12.2, 84 to 88 Goodwood Parade, East Victoria Park, amendment to the development approval extension of time. I'd like to now ask elected members, were there any other questions from other items? Otherwise, we will specifically go to those reports I've mentioned. Again, the silence means no, so that's a good thing. Okay. All right, so we will then move to item 12.1 under the Chief Community Planner reports, the Burswood South Streetscape Improvement Concept Plan, the final plan. And I believe I have a question from Councillor Wilfred Hendricks. Councillor Hendricks.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Anderson. Yes, I have. In this one, the community has raised concerns about traffic. It seems to be quite an ongoing issue with this area. And in the final sort of in the officer's report, it mentions the next stage, and it says it can include an expanded traffic investigation. And the next one actually says, if we go ahead with this, the next step is to carry out further traffic assessment. I was just wondering what the difference is between a further traffic assessment or an expanded traffic investigation.
Thank you, Councillor Hendricks. I would now address that question to the Chief Community Planner, Natalie Martin-Good, please.
Through the chair, thanks for the question. I would consider an investigation the same. So that Councillor Hendricks is correct. There's been lots of comments about traffic. So the next phase would be an analysis and an investigation to address those traffic concerns. So I would see them as one of the same.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Councillor Hendricks, before we move on? No? Great. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to report item 12.2, 84 to 88 Goodwood Parade, East Victoria Park, amendment to development approval, the extension of time. I have a question from Councillor Hendricks, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Anderson. Yeah, the first one's to do with the title, but it actually says East Victoria Park. I think that's a misprint and it should say Burswood. Can that be fixed for the next the OCM, number one?
Yes, Councillor Hendricks, I'm sure that can be fixed. I could direct the question to the Chief Community Planner, Ms. Natalie Martin-Good.
Through the chair, yes, that would be very easy to fix. Thanks.
That's no one. Yes, there was another one. I had it mentioned again in the office report. One of the most important considerations is that there's no residential development that has yet occurred. I was wondering if they've taken the Quest into account, because that's quite a large development, very close.
Our Chief Community Planner, Natalie Martin-Good, if you're able to respond to that.
Through the chair, if I can refer that to the Manager of Development Services, Mr. Cruikshank, please.
Oh, yes, please, Mr. Cruikshank, if you could respond.
Yes, thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. The statement I think Councillor Hendricks is referring to is at page 42. And just to provide a bit of clarity around that, it does say that no residential development has yet occurred in the close to immediate proximity of the subject site. So yes, there has been the Crest Apartments, which has occurred. This is talking about close to immediate. So I guess that's probably more in terms of almost immediately adjoining or directly adjoining. Is in that context that statement's made.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question,
yes.
Councillor Hendricks? Yep. Thank you. Moving on to item 12.3, the Metronet management and maintenance of public spaces draft position statement. I have a question listed from Councillor Devereux, please.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Anderson. I just wanted to ask, reflect that I was glad to see in both the attachment and the report a reference to securing in this item 12.3 agreement for leasable spaces to help activate the precincts around stations and fund the care and maintenance for open and community space. I wanted to know or ask how assured are we that this would be agreed to, and are there other successful examples of the PTA or the government allowing it around other station precincts successfully? Thanks.
Thank you. I'll refer that question to our Chief Community Planner, Natalie Martin-Good, please.
Through the chair, there's no level of assurance that this would be agreed to. However, Metronet staff have indicated that they're certainly open to considering that. They've not given any assurances yet. In terms of other examples, not been aware of any examples where the PTA has agreed to leasable space within the rail corridor. I am aware of some examples over east, but not in WA.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for your response. Are there any other questions, Councillor Devereux, before I move on?
No, thanks, Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Councillor Hendrick, do you have your hand up? Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, Deputy Mayor Anderson, I have got a question on this one. It's to do with the local planning strategy, the station precinct plans. It mentions in the I think in the strategic plan that the at Carlisle Station that the station precinct plan is no longer necessary, and yet in the report itself, it's on a couple of occasions. One in the letter from the CEO to the thing, it actually mentions that they want funding, and it said the state government should contribute an additional 200,000 funding to fund the Carlisle or the precinct planning for the Carlisle and Oak Street station, and also in another part there, the same thing. This is on in the analysis point number 13, funding for the precinct or station precinct structure, requesting state government contributes again money for the Carlisle and Oak Street stations. I was wondering if the Carlisle one should actually be in that because it's no longer relevant according to the strategic plan, or just some clarification on that. There seems to be sort of two different.
Okay, so can you just be a little bit more succinct, just so I understand? You're asking, because you dropped out a little bit for me. So You're asking about the Carlisle station, just before I direct the question to the community planner.
Well, it says that the local planning strategy and scheme review has revealed that the station precinct plan at Carlisle Station is unnecessary, and yet in the report it says we're going to be wanting funding for the Carlisle precinct station plan. So I can't see, if it's not necessary, why we have to, why it's listed there to get funding for it.
Okay, all right. I will ask the Chief Community Planner, Natalie Martin-Good, if she's able to respond to that question, please.
Through the chair, happy to look at both the local planning strategy recommendation and this recommendation for Metronet to make sure that they're aligned. So we'll undertake to do that and provide some further comment in the report to OCN.
Okay, thank you. That's all I was after.
Thank you for your response. Councillor Devereux, do you have a question?
Yes, sorry, Deputy Mayor Anderson. I thought I didn't have an additional question, but thinking about the response did make me reflect on one, because I think the response was that there aren't any other stations with leasable spaces, and I was just reflecting on places like Perth Station that seem to have shops within the station that I thought may be of a similar category, but perhaps I'm incorrect in that. But can I just clarify that if it seems that there are none in Perth? Thanks.
Just to clarify, is your question around whether we will be having the same type of opportunities in shops? Is that what?
So yes, the report talks about negotiations with Metronet for leasable spaces, which means there would be a way to help cover costs for the open space and other things happening in that area, which is great, but also to activate precincts. And I was trying to think of other possible examples, and I wondered if Perth Station would be an example of that. Or any other stations. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for your question. The Chief Community Planner, Natalie Martin-Good, are you able to respond to that, please?
Through the chair, yes, that is a good point. I hadn't thought of that, and my CEO has just reminded me that that is the case. So, Councillor Devereux, you are correct.
Okay, thanks.
And thank you for your response.
Yep.
All right. Is there any other questions, Councillor Devereux? I'll ask you to drop your hand down, please.
Oh, yep, sorry.
That's all right. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 12.4, the draft local planning strategy, consultation outcomes and recommendation modification. I have a question from Councillor Devereux.
My question was, given I understand there were only 7 submissions submitted on the Vic Park FIA, would it be feasible to retain this to allow future consideration of greater urban density in this zone, which is particularly strategic for the proximity to the train station and Albany Highway strip?
Thank you. I'll refer that question to our Chief Community Planner, Natalie Martin-Good, please.
Through the chair, staff aren't recommending that it be retained because the strategy already proposes significant planning reform across a range of areas. The removal of that multiple dwelling restriction in the Vic Park future investigation area would be considered in future years when the local planning strategy is scheduled for its next review. When you think of that area's ability to accommodate infill, there's actually a very small number of properties that can actually have multiple dwellings. There's been an assessment. There's actually only 14 properties that potentially could have infill. We've looked at ones that are already developed. We've looked at vacant properties. So of those 14 properties that could potentially be developed, that the likelihood of all 14 of those being developed is probably quite slim as well. And for that reason, we've not recommended that way.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ms. Martin-Good. Okay. All right. So I will move on to the next report, which is 12.5, Higgins Park Tennis Club CLNP application. I have a question from Councillor Devereux, please.
Sorry, I'm struggling to juggle my screens. I see in this item 12.5 that the lights being sought with outside funds are aimed to be energy efficient LEDs, and I wonder whether the strategic alignment or elsewhere in the officer's report could include reference to the positive synergy with our climate emergency and environment plans to make this more explicit and recognised as an added rationale for the application, and ideally to encourage others to consider something similar. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll now refer the question to our Chief Community Planner, Natalie Martin-Good, please.
Through the chair, very happy to include additional information about that. We'll include that in the further comment section that'll be in the report to OCN.
Many thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to our Chief Operation Officer reports. And we have a question on 13.3, the delegation for CEO for the 3-bin Garden Organic System Procurement Award. I have a question from Councillor Devereux, please.
I am excited about the move to a garden organic bin, particularly as a precursor to FOGO. I see reference in the report on 13.3 to drawing on other councils' experience, but no direct detailed reference to that. Can the bin change also be considered an opportunity to consolidate our goal for less waste?
Thank you. I'll now direct that question to our Chief Operations Officer, Natalie Adams, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The short answer is yes, but if you could please direct the question also to the Manager of Technical Services, he could add something to that. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite the Manager of Technical Services to respond, please. I now invite Mr. John Wong to respond, Manager of Technical Services, if he is available.
Yep, sorry, Madam Chair. I was not able to unmute myself just now. So we do have the waste education program, for example, which we are rolling out now in conjunction with the preparation for the rollout of the 3-bin system. And also we have other initiatives such as the garage sale trail, basically to further remind people about waste to reduce waste being sent to landfill. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. Do you have any other questions, Councillor Devereux?
Yes, I do, Deputy Mayor Anderson. I have a couple more questions, if that's okay. The first is, can you advise if there is expected to be less waste? And if so, what consideration and evidence was weighed up and seen from other councils' experience to keep the current 240 litre capacity red bin rather than opt for a smaller red bin, given on the face of it there may be less waste total with the GO bin, and that will be decreased further with FOGO? Thanks.
Look, I'll start with directing the question to our Chief Operations Officer, Natalie Adams, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And may I request that you direct this to the Manager of Technical Services?
Thank you. I'll direct the question to John Wong, Manager of Technical Services, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So overall, there is an expected reduction in waste that will be collected. Basically after the rollout of the garden organics bins, and in future, after the rollout of the FOGO or food organic and garden organic bins, definitely after extraction of organics from our general waste bins, we are expecting a reduction in the amount of waste collected in the general waste bins. So the factors that we've considered when we looked at the 240 litre standard size bin versus the 140 litre smaller size bin included the following. So excessive contamination was one of the major concerns, as we've discussed with our colleagues in other local governments. When there is a lack of space in the general waste bins, whether it's the red lid bin or the dark green lid bin. There's the potential for some household to place general waste or contaminants which are not garden organics into the lime green lid bin, which is meant for garden organics. There's also the concern about once we have a high rate of contamination in the garden organics bin, there is a potential for penalty to be applied, and that would be a liability for the town. The other factors include the requirement for inspection or bin audit is actually quite expensive. If we rely on some sort of enforcement to ensure that people are not just simply dumping contaminants or non-organic materials into the garden organic bins, it is actually quite a costly exercise. The other benefit of, I'm looking at the benefits now, when we have similar size bins and preferably similar brand or manufacturer, is much more cost effective for the town to undertake repairs or maintenance on those bins. And lastly, in terms of the verge space that would be taken up by the 140 litre smaller size bin, as opposed to the 240 litre standard size bin, there's not much difference in the area on the verge that's required. Yeah, I hope I've answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Are there any other questions, Councillor Devereux?
Yes, I do have a follow-up question. Would it be possible to for residents to opt in for the smaller 140 litre red bin in place of the larger bin? And if so, would there be incentives suggested for residents to do that?
I'll direct that question to our Chief Operations Officer, Natalie Adams, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, the residents can still opt in for the 140 litre red bin in place of what we're proposing as the standard 240 litre bin. In terms of any incentives, we are happy to look at that and see what we can do with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Devereux, are there any other questions?
Just one final question. Can you also share further detail about the information from other councils' experience and include in that any information about why, as I understand it, the councils at Cockburn and Vincent have both opted for a smaller red bin, and what would be factors for us to weigh up in considering that?
Yeah, I think that we could have that information as like further information sent to elected members as opposed to probably being responded to this evening. Would you be happy with that, Councillor Devereux?
Yes.
Yeah, because I imagine it'd be quite lengthy. Would you be comfortable with that? To our Chief Operations Officer, Natalie Adams?
Yes, Deputy Mayor, I would. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Do we have any other questions before we move to the next item? Okay. All right, so report 13.4, Coolbardie Park Gates. I have a question listed from Councillor Carini.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Anderson. I just wanted to ask, noting the recommendation being that Council do not approve the installation of any self-locking or time-controlled gates at this time, and noting in the notes that the town has received requests from residents seeking the reinstatement of the basketball backboards at Coolbardie Park. when can these residents expect the further noise testing and corresponding consideration towards the potential return of basketball in the park to occur?
Thank you, Councillor Cremie. I'll direct that question to our Chief Operations Officer, Natalie Adams, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So, Councillor Cremie, there are probably two parts to that. So the first is that the town is actually looking at a review of the design that was undertaken with the consultant. And the second is the noise testing that still needs to be done. And we've set the parameters and scoped that up. So we're expecting that to be done by June this year. And I'd probably be just guessing if I was to say what we could do after that, because after that, those results, we need to look at what we could do and how we would mitigate those, the noise. So we would at the best be providing a further report back to council members, not necessarily back to council through this formal forum, but we would be making councillors aware of the timeframes and the intended actions from that point.
Thank you for your response. Were there any other questions, Councillor Cremie?
No, not at this time. Thank you, Deputy.
Councillor Lysandra, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Anderson. Yes, just following on from Councillor Cremie's question and the responses, there was mention of noise testing in June. Would that be with basketball hoops attached to those courts or without basketball hoop backboards? Sorry.
Our Chief Operations Officer, Natalie Adams, please.
Thank you. Through the Chair, the testing will be undertaken by June. That's our intent. And it will be with the backboards reinstated and the hoops. So it'd be simulated as per a normal game. And we would be testing the length of the court and the full court. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Were there any follow-up questions? Oh, Councillor Lysandra, your hand is down. Next on my list, I have Councillor Devereux. Would you like to ask a question?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Anderson. I just wanted to ask if there are other basketball courts in the close vicinity of Coolbardie Park that people that are currently or formerly playing there could also access, and how the access to other close courts compares with other parts of the town in terms of number of facilities available to people who want to play basketball.
Thank you. I'll direct that question to our Chief Operations Officer, Natalie Adams, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So through the Chair, there are other basketball courts in the vicinity, and signage has been prepared to state that and assist with that, and that'll be installed at the Coolbardie courts to help direct users to other facilities in the town. And with regards to access to those other facilities, I think we will take that and look at that and provide that information in the further considerations. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your response. Councillor Hamer, do you have a question, please?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Anderson. It was in relation to the sound measures. Is double glazing for the affected residents an option that could be looked at?
I will direct that question to our Chief Operations Officer, Natalie Adams, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through the Chair, sound mitigation measures, such as double glazing are one of the options that can be looked at, but we do need some accurate testing results undertaken in the correct testing conditions to be able to make those recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. Are there any other questions before we move on from elected members? Okay. Thank you. All right, moving on to 15. Committee reports, we have none, we have nil. 16, motion of which previous notice has been given, we have none. 17, questions from members without notice on general matters. Do I have any questions from members on matters without notice, please? No questions. Moving on to our confidential matters. 18.1, we have the CEO mid-year performance review report for 2021-2022, and we will need to move behind closed doors. And so I would be requesting that everyone needs to leave except for elected members, the minute taker, Anthony and Desmond Brace. So if at this stage, I will declare the meeting closed to the public, as we don't need to come back afterwards to announce anything at this stage. It's a briefing forum, and I would thank everyone for participating. And I actually see there was a hand up. I just missed that from our governance officer, Brianna.
Hi, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry to. I just wanted to say, if elected members don't have any questions on that item, there is no need to go behind. You can just close the meeting if there is no questions, and all elected members can leave. But if elected members have any questions, then yes, we can stop the live stream and move behind closed doors.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Brownovic. Do I have any questions from elected members on the item? No? All right, well, that's great. Okay, so I will declare the meeting closed, and thank you all for your participation and your questions. And thank you for staff for being here this evening, and for all those who are watching from home. Thank you very much for being a part of our briefing session this evening.